Hello, and thank you for coming and joining us for this week's reflection, where we've moved on to Acts 9 and 10. I'm Pastor Taylor, the pastor here at Hyde Park Bethlehem United Methodist Church, and I'm glad you've chosen to take some time to join us during your week. So, as we continue the story of the early church, we have one of the most significant events in the church for Acts 9, the conversion of Saul into Paul when he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus. And then we're going to talk about some more going on outside of Jerusalem before returning to Jerusalem in next week's reflection. But of course, let's start then with Acts 9. In Acts 9, in a well-told story, Saul is going to Damascus to persecute any Christians found there. But on the way, he falls off of his horse or donkey after encountering Jesus on the way and is struck blind. He's instructed to go into the town and seek out a person by the name of Ananias, who's there as a leather worker, and go forth and seek his healing there. Of course, Ananias prays for him, the scales fall from his eyes, and we have the conversion of Saul, who takes the name Paul, and eventually Acts is going to shift from the original apostles to follow this person's journey. But for today, I want to reflect on that minor, insignificant character of Ananias, just thinking about him in his lowly cast. Leatherwork, in case you were not familiar, is a dirty, smelly operation and is often regulated by cities out to the extent to the less desirable parts, and is indeed a physically taxing, if important, job in order to do. But here we have Saul coming in and seeking out one of these lower class peoples. Now, God goes directly to Ananias and lets him know that Saul is going to be coming and how to pray for him. But I can feel in this scripture the tension that Ananias has, knowing that he's going to be praying for the person who's coming to persecute him. And I can always think in this moment about how each and every person, how we occasionally get asked to do things that we don't want to do. Now, there are, of course, important things to observe when we're asked to do something, because there are two different types. There's the type of things that we really don't want to do and shouldn't do. If you're asked to, say, in an extreme example, perform a surgery, well, I don't know if there are any surgeons listening, but chances are likely that that would be the least probable outcome, and we might want to say no to doing that. But I'm talking about those other times here, those times where we get that feeling in our pit that, yeah, even though I really don't want to do this with my head, in my heart, I know that I should go out and do this. It's in these moments that we get to live out that faith, knowing and thinking that even though we do these things, even when we consider everything that's going on, we continue to live out our lives in faith, knowing that sometimes we know through faith to take that action. Now, if you're thinking about one of those times like right now and would like to share it in the video, the comments are open if you'd like to share that with other people. Now, moving on to our second chapter in Acts 10, we're back to Peter moving along areas outside of Jerusalem. In a lot of my studies growing up, Acts 10 is one of those chapters that we love and cherish to study because it contains some of the biggest examples of God changing how God acts and how the church goes out and differentiates itself from its origins. As the story goes, Peter was receiving a vision from God where he saw everything that he, an observant Jew, was not allowed to do, as far as eating and killing animals. Multiple times, a cloth comes down with those animals, and he is told to kill and eat, which he refuses to do, eventually acquiescing to God to go and eat. He then gets a message that some messengers will be sent for him from a Gentile named Cornelius, and when they come, he goes and baptizes them into the entire church. But indeed, it's that moment before the baptism takes place that I want to focus on right now. Peter recognizes that even before that baptism takes place, the Spirit has already come alongside, has already fallen alongside all of Cornelius' household. And therefore it's fine for him to include these people in the growing church. In this moment, I'm reminded, unfortunately, of one of the least positive aspects of our life in the church. How the church is great at following behind, might recognize what happens and eventually catch up, but generally is well behind following the grace that God is extending to people. In these moments, I can't help but think of all the various isms that we still cling to, we still practice, even though we might rail against them or want them to go away. Racism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, all of these things continue to show up in the church and in practice. Even though church leadership might condemn it, and we continue to live out our lives in ways that make them possible. Now, of course, we live in a time when some of these are more easy to live out practice than others, because sometimes it requires us just to do nothing and go along with society in order to accept their continuing practices. But I've always looked at Acts 10 as one of those times calling us to continually go out and find the good that God is doing in the world, find the grace that God is spreading around, and recognize it and change our own practices, change our own ways based on those continual actions that we see God making. And so just as Peter recognized that God was moving among Gentiles long before we even considered them for inclusion in the church, so too will we see next chapter that this debate will come to a head in Jerusalem. And we'll find out what the council in Jerusalem, really the first Christian council that ever takes place, considers and how they include all people in God's building kingdom and in the emerging Christian movement, the way of Jesus, the way of inclusion and love for all. So I hope you'll join us next week for our reflection as we move on to Acts 11 and 12, and I hope to see you next week.